"Don't let them appear in my frame, they ruin every shot." The words echoed through the backstage of Golden Age Hollywood, an invisible but absolute command, revealing a dark world that the lights never shone on. Some spat out words of contempt, treating black performers as unworthy of the camera. Others meticulously noted weaknesses in casting files, erasing names simply for being unsuitable, turning opportunity into a statistic. Some didn't need to lift a finger. Their words alone crushed any effort-imposed superiority and provoked laughter behind the scenes. All of it maintained a closed Hollywood where glamour became a mask for disdain, and racism didn't just exist, it was celebrated. Which legends actively sowed this contempt? How cruel were they in ways the public never knew? 1. John Wayne, Hollywood icon and legitimized racial contempt. John Wayne was more than an actor. He was the ideal Hollywood had built for America, tall, tough, moral, the embodiment of justice. Yet in 1971, during a Playboy interview, he tore that facade apart with an undeniable statement. "White people are the superior race in the world. No euphemisms, no apologies." He went on to claim that black people were not yet mature enough to be granted the same rights as whites, and Native Americans had been selfish to resist losing their lands. This was not drunken rambling. It was a published public argument more than a decade into the civil rights movement. Beyond public statements, Wayne actively refused to work with black actors or on projects involving minority groups. In 1957, as Hollywood began opening doors to black performers in prominent roles, Wayne vehemently opposed the change, insisting, "This will destroy the traditions and values of America." He refused collaboration with directors and producers, inclined to cast black actors in major parts, claiming it would devalue the film industry. Wayne framed these views as loyalty to Hollywood tradition and reputation. While contemporaries like James Stewart and Henry Fonda spoke out against such practices, Wayne remained staunchly conservative. He supported politicians with openly racist positions and even endorsed policies that restricted minority rights. These actions weren't isolated incidents, they shaped a deeply controversial public image. Despite his fame, Wayne's racist statements and behaviors gradually eroded his standing, especially as he engaged in political campaigns opposing racial equality. If John Wayne used the hero archetype to legitimize contempt, Johnny Carson would do it more subtly through laughter live television and the silence of an audience that never questioned the joke. 2. Johnny Carson, racial discrimination on national television. Black people are only fit to be a joke on stage, not to think or speak seriously. Johnny Carson did not need to shout or express hatred in crude terms. He did it nightly before tens of millions of viewers through a measured tone and jokes calibrated down to the precise pause. From 1962 to 1992, The Tonight Show became a stage where racial prejudice was packaged as entertainment and broadcast live as a harmless routine. Some of the clearest evidence lies in the recurring minstrel-style sketches and impersonations of the 1960s and 1970s. Carson and his writers routinely distorted Asian accents, exaggerated physical features, and reduced entire cultures to caricature. Native Americans were framed as backward or alcoholic. Black people became safe punchlines requiring no context and inviting no rebuttal. The camera always cut at the exact moment the audience erupted in laughter, quietly affirming that what had just occurred was acceptable. Carson rarely delivered overtly racist lines himself. Instead, he posed innocent questions, then paused. The band supplied a suggestive musical cue. The audience laughed. This televisual rhythm was the most disturbing evidence of all. Prejudice was not transmitted through aggression, but through seamless coordination between host production team and studio audience. Responsibility dissolved because everything was disguised as humor. Guests of color, when they appeared, were often placed in positions of endurance rather than agency, expected to laugh along with jokes aimed at their own communities, or to remain silent in order to preserve dignity on national television. The Tonight Show rarely offered them space to speak about lived experiences of discrimination. Instead, they functioned as props within a pre-established order. The power imbalance required no declaration. It was unmistakable. Even beyond race, Carson's handling of power revealed a familiar pattern. When Joan Rivers, once his trusted substitute host, stepped outside his orbit to build her own career, Carson severed contact for years. There was no public confrontation, no explanation, only a silence prolonged enough to send a clear message: those who deviate disappear from the frame. This form of control mirrored the show's broader operation, removing voices that threatened the stability of the existing hierarchy. Johnny Carson did not need to express hatred openly. He merely transformed contempt into something America learned to laugh along with every night. And when racial discrimination is performed as entertainment, it ceases to be recognized as a problem. It becomes habit. From televised laughter to polished charm on the silver screen, another Golden Age star carried that same contempt even further: Clark Gable. 3. Clark Gable, racial discrimination sustained by power and silence. On the set of Gone with the Wind, 1939, Clark Gable did not need to shout to assert authority. He only needed to remain silent. When Hattie McDaniel, the black actress who played Mammy, was required to use separate entrances, separate dressing rooms, and separate restrooms, Gable did not ask why. A crew member later recalled, "He saw everything. He simply turned away." No record exists of Clark Gable publicly using racial slurs, but neither does anyone recall a single instance in which he stood beside his black colleagues when Jim Crow rules were enforced openly on his own film set. Discrimination functioned so smoothly it required no commands, and Gable was among its greatest beneficiaries. A long-circulating MGM rumor holds that Gable once told his manager privately that he did not want to get involved in racial politics because my role is to act, not to be an activist. The statement sounds neutral, but in 1930s, Hollywood neutrality meant siding with those already in power. The contradiction surfaced most clearly at the Atlanta premiere of Gone with the Wind, where Hattie McDaniel was barred from attending because she was black. According to internal Selznick International Pictures records, Gable expressed dissatisfaction and threatened not to appear. Yet this so-called protest ended quickly. McDaniel was allowed into the theater on the condition that she sit separately, far from the principal cast. Gable walked the red carpet. Cameras flashed. The order remained intact. A Hollywood journalist of the era wrote bitterly, "Clark Gable did not break the wall. He merely asked that a chair be placed for the person forced to sit behind it." At the 1940 Academy Awards, when McDaniel became the first black performer to win an Oscar, she was seated at a small table near the service area. Clark Gable was present in the room. There is no record of objection, no public gesture, no visible refusal, only applause, and then a return to normalcy. A saying circulated quietly among filmmakers at the time: "People of color are never my priority. They exist only to serve my success." That is precisely the most dangerous form of racism, one that requires no overt hostility, only acceptance of a discriminatory system because it serves one's own interests. Clark Gable built an image on screen as a man who defied every rule. Off-screen, he accepted Hollywood's cruelest rules as long as the throne remained his. And it was this polite, silent form of discrimination that paved the way for a more refined, more elusive figure, Cary Grant. 4. Cary Grant racism masked as refinement. Cary Grant never appeared as an overtly prejudiced man. On the contrary, he was the embodiment of charm, a perfectly polished British accent, a meticulously timed smile, and a demeanor that made Hollywood believe he was a civilized man, above the rough edges of his era. It is precisely for this reason that Grant's approach to race was so difficult to detect and so difficult to challenge. On 1940s-50s film sets, Grant was notorious for controlling his image to the extreme. He not only chose his co-stars, but also dictated how they appeared alongside him. According to the memoirs of an RKO assistant producer, Grant once demanded that black extras be repositioned in a crowd scene because they ruined the visual composition. No insult was uttered, only a light remark. "People of color only appear when I allow it. They are the conflict I never want to see." and a person was removed from the frame. A persistent casting rumor claimed that Grant disliked black actors appearing too close in emotionally nuanced scenes. He feared the audience would be distracted, an anonymous director later explained. Distracted from what no one can say. But the result was clear. Black roles around Cary Grant were rarely given depth, rarely given extended lines, and almost never placed on equal footing. In private life, Grant maintained absolute distance. He attended lavish parties and exclusive clubs where black people appeared only in service roles. When asked by a journalist in the early 1960s about the rising civil rights movement, Grant smiled and said, "I believe politics should not interfere with cinema." The remark sounded benign, but in the context of Hollywood at the time, it meant refusing to side with the oppressed. The paradox of Cary Grant lies here. Celebrated as an icon of sophistication, he maximized a discriminatory system to preserve his perfect image. He did not need to demean anyone. He simply kept his world clean, orderly, and free of faces that might force Hollywood to confront its conscience. A screenwriter who worked with Grant noted in a personal diary, he hated conflict. And for Cary Grant, black people were conflict. Not because they did anything wrong, but because their mere presence compelled Hollywood to face what it always wanted to avoid. Cary Grant taught Hollywood a dangerous lesson: racism can be maintained while preserving a polite, even beloved image. No hatred, no violence, just strategic silence labeled professionalism. And it was precisely this type of veiled prejudice that paved the way for Jerry Lewis, a performer who transformed insult into public entertainment before millions. 5. Jerry Lewis, when racism becomes national comedy. Lewis did not insult black people out of hatred. He insulted them with laughter, and that is the most dangerous kind. Jerry Lewis did not hide. He displayed. On stage in front of cameras amid the roaring laughter of 1950s-60s American audiences, Lewis transformed racial prejudice into entertainment, and Hollywood applauded because it sold tickets. In his early television shows and comedy films, Lewis frequently used caricatures of black people, distorted voices, exaggerated gestures, bulging eyes, jokes that turned real human beings into fools for laughs. No insults were necessary, no violence, just transform the subject into spectacle. A 1958 television critic wrote, "Lewis does not offend with hatred, he offends with laughter, and that is the most dangerous form." Behind the scenes, it was worse. An NBC crew member recalled that during a live broadcast, Lewis requested the replacement of the entire group of black supporting actors because they made the frame look messy. The comment was delivered casually, as if it were a lighting or sound request. No one objected. The show went on. The laughter continued, perfectly timed for broadcast. Lewis often dismissed criticism with the familiar line, "I'm just joking." But over the years, these jokes always had a clear target, mocking communities with no power to resist. When the civil rights movement gained momentum, Lewis did not change. He avoided interviews about race, continued performing the same formula, and was shielded by Hollywood's familiar defense. "It's just comedy." A repeated rumor in writer circles claims Lewis once refused to edit a scene deemed offensive because the audience likes it that way. For him, the reaction of the crowd mattered more than the dignity of the people turned into spectacle. And the crowd, nurtured by long-standing prejudices, rewarded him with fame, money, and absolute creative control. The paradox of Jerry Lewis lies in this: he was celebrated as a comedic genius, a bringer of joy to America, while that joy was built on reinforcing warped images of black people. Lewis did not stand outside the system of racial discrimination. He made it easier to swallow, easier to laugh at, and therefore it endured longer. Once audiences were trained to laugh at offense, Hollywood turned to a more complex, conflicted figure, Marlon Brando. 6. Marlon Brando, when on-screen progress masks off-screen bias. Marlon Brando is often hailed as the disruptor of old Hollywood instinctive acting rebellious spirit, an advocate for oppressed communities. He famously refused the Oscar in 1973 to protest Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans. But behind the curtain, the story was more complicated. According to notes and memoirs from colleagues in the 1950s-60s, Brando was unpredictable and verbally ruthless. An assistant director at Warner Brothers recalled that Brando frequently made racially charged jokes during breaks, particularly targeting black cast and crew. He spoke as if testing reactions the assistant wrote. And if no one objected, he continued. Brando's discrimination was not systematic like Clark Gable's, nor politely veiled like Cary Grant's. It manifested as personal contradiction, publicly supporting civil rights, yet privately allowing prejudice to surface. During the filming of The Chase 1966, a black supporting actor remembered Brando saying, "Black people are not to stand too close to me while I rest, understood." No explanation, no reasoning, just a clear line drawn. Defenders of Brando often note his close relationships with artists of color. That's true, but it made the rumors more uncomfortable. One journalist following him wrote, "He loved minority communities as an idea, but did not always respect them as equals." Brando could lecture on injustice for hours, yet still unleash offensive remarks in private anger. The most controversial instances emerged in later interviews when Brando spoke on race and power, with a sharp, sometimes prejudiced tone. Editors reportedly cut passages because they were too venomous to publish. These words did not ruin Brando's public image. Audiences had already accepted him as a symbol of rebellion, and symbols are often forgiven more than real people. Once such contradictions became familiar, Hollywood shifted attention to a safer, more wholesome image. A warm, comforting voice masking old biases. Bing Crosby. 7. Bing Crosby racism, hidden behind a smooth voice. Hollywood built Bing Crosby as the model ideal, American warm-voiced, family-oriented, politically uncontroversial. Yet beneath that harmless image, racial discrimination flowed effortlessly. On radio programs in the 1930s and 1940s, Crosby frequently participated in skits that used caricatured voices and stereotypes of black people for laughs. No direct insults were necessary. Entire communities were turned into repeated entertainment for millions of listeners. Backstage, the exclusion was even more deliberate. A CBS musician recalled that Crosby opposed placing black artists in primetime slots. "Those outsiders only appear when I allow it. Anything else would make the show unsafe," understood. There was no artistic debate, no evaluation of talent. Skin color was the deciding factor. Names were struck from schedules after brief studio conversations. Crosby's prejudice was not hatred, it was calculated exclusion. He avoided long-term collaboration with black artists, avoided topics that might challenge audiences to confront injustice, and maintained his shows as safe. Safe here meant a world where white performers were central, and black performers appeared only when they did not disrupt that order. Crosby never publicly endorsed segregation, and he never spoke up for those marginalized. His silence, wrapped in a gentle smile and a soothing voice, allowed prejudice to persist without justification. And when Hollywood was willing to forgive a man for being pleasant, it was ready with a moral blade to judge a woman who dared step outside her assigned mold. Ingrid Bergman. 8. Ingrid Bergman, purity protected by double standards. People of color have no place in my world. They exist only as the background to white stories. Ingrid Bergman is not remembered for overtly racist words. She occupied a subtler role, Hollywood's white moral icon, reinforcing the old order. In the 1940s, her roles often centered white characters in foreign worlds. Indigenous or non-white people existed only as background supporting voices or obstacles. No insults were needed, the storytelling itself always favored whites. On set, Bergman was disciplined and no trouble. A production assistant recalled she opposed changing a co-star to a black actor, saying it was incompatible with the image. The reason was simple. The audience won't believe it. The role was narrowed. The decision stood. When her personal scandal erupted in the early 1950s, Hollywood shielded her not for fairness, but because she embodied a pure standard marketable worldwide. Black performers, by contrast, could be ruined by minor missteps. No words were needed. The double standard worked automatically. Bergman became a cog in the system, not the aggressor, but the face-making exclusion appear reasonable, elegant, and exportable. From this polished hypocrisy, Hollywood would move to another woman, someone who challenged norms while carrying her own biases, Katharine Hepburn. 9. Katharine Hepburn, freedom for herself, limits for others. By 1938, on the set of Bringing Up Baby at RKO Pictures, Katharine Hepburn had already established herself as a star with a voice. The film brimmed with sharp dialogue and a new brand of female empowerment, yet behind the camera the old structures remained untouched. Non-white actors appeared only as unnamed background servants with no lines. A production assistant later recalled, "People of color are never part of my Hollywood. They exist only so that I, a white person, can shine." That silence on a set where she wielded power spoke volumes. By 1942, Woman of the Year MGM positioned Hepburn as the ideal intellectual independent woman. Yet at MGM, segregation policies were rigorously enforced. Non-white performers had separate entrances and dressing rooms. Hepburn, the studio's public face, appeared across the press as a progressive figure. Yet, no record shows she challenged this treatment. An MGM screenwriter noted in his diary, "She fought fiercely for her roles, but not for anyone else." In interviews from the late 1950s, Hepburn remarked that many non-Western countries needed time to catch up with civilization. Spoken in New York during a private press conversation, the words weren't aimed at an individual, but they reflected Hollywood's familiar top-down perspective. It wasn't hate. It was the confidence that one's own position entitled judgment over others. Katharine Hepburn broke boundaries for white women on the American screen, but she did not breach the racial lines Hollywood had constructed around her. Her progress had a very specific address, and it stopped precisely where the privileges of the era allowed. From this model of selective progress, Hollywood turned to another icon, someone who would transform charm into a veil for old patterns, Fred Astaire. 10. Fred Astaire, when charm becomes a veil for discrimination. In 1936, after Swing Time premiered with the blackface number Bojangles of Harlem, a Broadway reporter allegedly recorded Fred Astaire backstage saying, "Those ugly people exist only as material. I am the art, that's all." The comment did not mention black performers, but it made very clear who was the center of attention and who existed only as material. Among New York dancers of the era, a bitter rumor circulated. Producers preferred Astaire to perform black culture rather than hire real black dancers, because white performers made it look more elegant. Astaire wasn't credited with originating this statement, but he accepted the result. Continued performing. Continued being celebrated, while the artists whose culture was appropriated never shared the spotlight. A black critic writing for a Harlem community paper after the preview commented, "They paint the skin dark, strip away the rhythm, and then wash it all clean before leaving." Astaire offered no response, no apology, no adjustments. That silence, repeated over years, became the clearest message of all. Astaire did not mock black performers like Jerry Lewis, nor maintain the veneer of civility like Cary Grant. He did something more insidious. He transformed cultural appropriation into an aesthetic standard, convincing audiences that it was homage rather than exclusion. And when prejudice is danced flawlessly, it becomes harder to recognize and harder to challenge. Hollywood once hailed them as untouchable legends. But behind the dazzling lights, some stars revealed a darker side. Words of disdain, acts of superiority, openly harboring contempt for people of color. Hidden rumors and forgotten evidence now come to light, showing that the glamour was just a fragile mask concealing vices that no spotlight could erase. That brilliant light could not dispel the shadows they left behind. Prejudice, condescension, and quiet arrogance persisted, undeniable and unshakable. Golden Age Hollywood was not just a dream, it was a lesson. Sometimes the icons you admire are the very ones who quietly sow hatred. Like and follow to uncover the secrets Hollywood never wanted you to see, where brilliance and sin walk hand in hand, and not everyone deserves the light they were given.